when Elias Thorne's vehicle was found, there was neither a body nor a trace of blood inside. The minibus seemed to have been crushed from within by an invisible hand. However, the last frame of video recovered from the melted server took this case far beyond a missing person file to something far more terrifying, because the face on the screen belonged to Elias, but the camera lenses were focused on his sunken eye sockets, as if he were still alive. The darkness that descended upon the ancient forests of the North Cascades, untouched by axes, and left as mere gray blots on maps, was not nightfall as we know it. It was a dense, tangible substance that rejected and swallowed light. Elias Thorne felt exactly that as he sat in the makeshift command center he had set up in the back, the cargo area, of his modified black panel van. The suffocating, claustrophobic pressure felt by a crew struggling against the pressure inside a bathyscaphe thousands of meters below the ocean's surface. Outside, Washington State's infamous, bone-chilling, slowly decaying rain was falling. The drops pounded on the vehicle's poorly insulated metal roof, creating a chaotic, arrhythmic, and nerve-wracking symphony that disrupted the deadly silence inside. The wind gently rocked the vehicle's chassis, causing the metal to creak. These sounds sanded down Elias already, tense nerve endings like sandpaper. The pale, sickly blue light emanating from the 3 main monitors in front of him illuminated the deep lines on Elias' tired face, his dark circles from lack of sleep, and his unshaven beard that hadn't been trimmed in days. His fingertips had turned nicotine yellow, but he couldn't smoke here. His fingertips had turned nicotine yellow, but he couldn't smoke here. The sensitive electronic equipment inside didn't like smoke. So, between his lips, was a plastic toothpick, chewed to shreds. Elias had been doing this job for 10 years. They called him the ghost hunter in the business. He stepped in at those hopeless points where the police department's budget fell short. Helicopters couldn't get through the dense trees. Search and rescue. Dogs lost the scent, and officials closed the case saying, Mother Nature took him back. He was the last resort for families who had lost hope, technology's mercenary defying nature. But tonight's mission was different. There was no official missing person report, no announcement on police radios. Not even the sheriff's department knew about it. There was only an encrypted email, a hefty crypto payment from an untraceable Swiss-based account, and a single set of coordinates. Sector 44. This was the cursed area the locals whispered about, calling it the Walking Forest, a place where even GPS satellites created blind spots, where magnetic anomalies made compasses go haywire. The email mentioned that an experienced mountaineer, Marcus L., had gone missing there, but Elias was too desperate for money to question what a mountaineer was doing there at this hour, in this weather, and at the onset of winter. Gambling debts were knocking at the door. bank accounts were in the red, and conscience didn't pay the bills. Elias poured coffee from his thermos into his cup with trembling hands. The liquid was pitch black and tar-like. Cold. He took a sip, grimaced, and pushed the cup aside, away from the monitor cables. He focused his attention on the system in front of him, the machine to which his life was tied. System booting up, he muttered. His voice sounded muffled, echoing and lonely. Between the metal walls of the van, he ran his fingers over the mechanical keyboard. With each line of code, he entered into the command prompt. The servers in the back of the van began to whine like jet engines. The sound of the cooling fans rose, mixing with the sound of rain beating on the roof to create a strange hum. Left screen, battery status 98%. Wind speed 45 km/h. Strong northwest wind. At the risk threshold for the drone. Signal strength stable. Right screen. The GPS map was loading. However, the location of Sector 44 was just a black, undefined void on the digital map. A warning in flashing, red letters read, "No data restricted area, magnetic anomaly." Center screen, the drone's camera, the machine Elias called Vulture, was not one of those plastic toys sold in tech stores. It was an industrial beast with a carbon fiber body, 6 propellers, military-grade FLIR thermal, cameras, LiDAR surface scanners, and directional microphones. It was his own design. It was his eyes, ears, and nerve endings in the sky. "All right, girl," Elias said, gripping the joysticks. His palms were sweaty. "Let's go find that ghost and get our money and leave." The hum outside the minivan rose, drowning out the sound of the rain. The Vulture lifted off from the wet ground. The image on the main screen shook. Raindrops hit the protective glass of the lens. The image on the main screen shook. Raindrops hit the protective glass of the lens, blurring the image for a moment. And then the machine rose above the treetops, into that endless, wet, and hostile darkness. When the drone rose above the tree line, about 40 meters high, the true violence of the wind revealed itself. The artificial horizon line on the telemetry screen began to sway dangerously. The drone was applying bursts of power to its motors to resist the wind, which was draining the battery faster than normal. Elias was trying to keep the machine steady with precise, surgical maneuvers. Visibility was terrible. The standard RGB camera couldn't penetrate the wall of rain. In front of it, only pitch darkness, white rain streaks reflecting the camera's light, and the occasional silhouette of giant sequoia trees, illuminated by distant lightning, were visible. This wasn't like looking for a needle in a haystack. It was like searching for a piece of driftwood in the middle of the ocean during a storm. Elias flipped the metal switch on the control panel down. Click. The image on the screen suddenly changed. The world was stripped of its colors. It was cloaked in shades of black, gray, and white. Thermal vision mode active. Now the forest no longer looked like a cluster of trees, but like a gray ocean. The laws of thermodynamics were Elias' greatest ally here. Anything alive, anything emitting heat, anything pumping blood, glowed as bright white spots against this gray backdrop. The rain-soaked, cold rocks, soil, and tree trunks were dark gray and black, while an owl out on its night hunt, a squirrel sheltering in a tree hollow, and a deer moving through the bushes glowed like stars. Anything emitting heat was visible. Hiding was impossible. The drone drifted away from the minibus where Elias was, heading north toward the heart of the restricted zone. The distance counter was increasing. 500 meters, 1,200 meters, 2,000 meters. The signal delay was starting to increase slightly, causing millisecond-long glitches in the image, but the transmission was still clear. Elias turned the thermal camera downward toward the dense tree canopy. His eyes scanned every pixel on the monitor, every shade of difference. A human body should glow like a bright white spot, a giant torch in this cold, wet hell. Even if hypothermia had set in, the body's temperature would still be much higher than the surrounding 5-degree air temperature. "Where are you?" Elias whispered. "Give me a sign. Give me a reason to go home." Minutes passed. Only the howl of the wind and the drone's motor hum filled the air. Just then, in the lower right corner of the screen, in the area where the roots of a centuries-old spruce tree lay, an anomaly appeared. A heat signature, bright white, very hot, nearly 40 degrees. Elias locked the drone onto that point and began to lose altitude. "Got it," he said, holding his breath. His heart was racing. "Marcus, are you there?" But as the drone descended, reaching 30 meters, Elias' brow furrowed. The shape of the heat signature was wrong. It didn't look human. It didn't look animal. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a puma. It looked more like boiling liquid spilled and spread across the ground. A shapeless, amorphous mass of heat. It was wrapped around the tree roots, covering the soil. "What is this?" he muttered. "An injured animal. Its internal organs spilled out." Elias digitally zoomed in on the image. The pixels sharpened, became clearer. The shape wasn't lying on the ground. It was emerging from within the earth. It was a living mass, pulsing like a heartbeat, seeping from beneath the soil toward the surface. And it was moving, slow, rhythmic contractions, as if the forest were taking a deep breath. That white mass was swelling and deflating. Elias' finger went to the take photo button. This was a phenomenon he couldn't explain in his report. Perhaps a geological one. Just as he pressed the shutter, something happened. That white, amorphous shape in the thermal image suddenly stopped. That rhythmic contraction ceased as if cut by a knife. The mass transitioned from liquid to solid form. It gathered itself. It rose. and the part of the shape that should have been the head slowly rose upward toward the sky, toward the drone 30 meters above. It looked directly into the lens. Elias, 2 kilometers away, safe in the minibus, felt a cold, dead hand creeping over the back of his neck. The hairs on his scalp stood on end. The eyes were invisible in the thermal camera. Only heat intensity was visible. But the heat distribution in the face area of that shape was like a hollowed-out pumpkin, with 2 cold spots on either side of the nose. Eyes weren't visible on the thermal camera, only heat density. But the heat distribution in that shape's facial area contained 2 cold, black voids. Just like a hollowed-out pumpkin, that thing had seen the drone flying in silent mode, its noise masked by the rain and wind. "Nonsense," Elias said aloud, trying to cling to his own voice. "It can't hear. It's impossible from this distance. Just a coincidence." But technology was infallible. It was watching him. The shape suddenly stood up, and Elias' breath caught in his throat, knotted like a hard lump. It was human-shaped. It had 2 arms, 2 legs. But its legs were bent backwards from the knees, like a grasshopper or a goat. Its upper body was disproportionately long. Its arms were so long that even when it stood up, its fingertips touched the ground. And then something happened that defied the laws of physics and biology. The heat signature began to change. It turned from bright white to gray. It was cooling down. Within seconds, that bright white spot matched the general temperature of the forest. That is, the cold gray. Heat camouflage. A living being controlled its body temperature by will, matching the ambient temperature within seconds. A living being was controlling its body temperature at will, matching the ambient temperature within seconds. It was fooling the thermal camera. Nothing was visible on the screen anymore. Only trees, rain, and pitch darkness. The being had vanished from thermal vision. It had become a ghost. "Impossible," Elias said, his voice trembling. His hands were starting to sweat. Biologically impossible. Even if it were cold-blooded, it couldn't lose heat that fast. Where did it go? He immediately reached for the button to switch to the RGB camera. Maybe he could see it with night vision or the drones. Powerful LED spotlight. His finger touched the button. The lights came on, but before he could see anything on the screen, it went static. As if an invisible, giant hand had grabbed the drone in the sky and squeezed it in its palm. The image cut out. Static noise exploded from the speakers. A signal loss warning began flashing in red letters. Elias frantically pulled back on the joysticks. No, come home, come home. He tried to activate the automatic return mode, but the data on the telemetry screen was going haywire. Altitude -50 meters. GPS position error. Compass spinning wildly around itself. The magnetic field was gone. Elias changed the antenna's direction to reestablish the connection, increased its gain. His hands were shaking. He was losing $20,000 worth of equipment. But that wasn't his real fear. His real fear was what that thing was. After 5 seconds of that suffocating, gray static, the image returned. But what he saw wasn't the forest view from moments before. The camera angle had changed. The drone wasn't in the air. It was on the ground. It was among wet mud and decaying leaves. Half the lens was buried in the mud. Elias thought, did it crash? He reached for the emergency kill switch to stop the engines. Did it crash? He reached for the emergency kill switch to shut down the motors. But the image on the screen moved. The drone's motors weren't running. The propellers weren't spinning. The telemetry read motor failure, propeller jam, but the drone was moving, shaking, dragging. Someone or something had picked up the drone from the ground and was carrying it. The camera angle was nauseatingly shaky. Elias could only make out the massive tree trunks and blurry raindrops rushing past on the monitor. Whatever was carrying the drone remained behind the camera, in its blind spot, so Elias couldn't see it. He could only hear the sound made by whatever was touching the drone's body. He could only hear the sound made by whatever was touching the drone's body. The microphone picked up, beyond the roar of the wind, a much more disturbing, primitive detail. Wet, sticky footsteps, and that rhythmic, guttural clicking. Click, 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 HRRR, click, click. This sound was not an animal breathing. It was a sickly, hybrid mix of the sound of a giant insect's chitinous exoskeleton rubbing together and the gurgling sound a person makes when drowning. Elias looked at the GPS data on the right screen. The drone was moving toward the exact center of that black void on the map. Sector 44, at a superhuman speed, much faster than a human could run. Can you hear me? Elias whispered, his hand involuntarily reaching for the microphone. It was illogical, but loneliness made people do crazy things. Let it go. It was illogical, but loneliness made people do crazy things. Leave it. The entity carrying the drone suddenly stopped. The camera steadied with a jolt. Ahead of them, about 50 meters away, that red column rose up. Out of curiosity, Elias tried turning on thermal camera mode again. This time, the system responded. On the thermal camera, this place looked like the gate of hell opening onto the earth, while the surrounding trees were cold blue-gray tones. This area emitted such intense heat that the monitor's color scale was insufficient, turning the image pure white and red. The sensors were overloaded, creating artifacts and digital distortions on the screen. This was not a forest fire. There were no flames. There was no smoke. The heat was coming from the ground itself. It was as if the Earth's crust had cracked open, and instead of magma, a biological, living heat was seeping out from beneath. System warning, excessive heat, risk of sensor damage. Elias had to turn off the thermal camera and switch to normal vision. When the RGB camera opened, Elias froze at the sight before him. He was nailed to his chair. This was a cave entrance, but it wasn't natural. It wasn't rock. The entrance's surroundings were covered in a resin-like, semi-transparent, amber-colored, sticky substance. This substance had wrapped around tree trunks, encasing them like cocoons. And within the substance, objects appeared, as if frozen in a time capsule. Elias zoomed in on the image with trembling fingers. There were deer antlers inside the resin, a bear skull, an old, rusted rifle barrel, and a piece of bright yellow synthetic fabric. The North Face logo on it was still visible. The missing climber's jacket. God, Elias' stomach clenched, the taste of saffron in his mouth. They're collecting them. They're collecting them. Marcus is there. The entity carried the drone into the cave. It wasn't pitch black inside. The resin, coating on the walls, emitted a faint bioluminescence. A pale, sickly green light illuminated the cave's interior. The cave floor was paved with bones. Hundreds, maybe thousands of bones, from small rodents to deer to bears. Most broken, marrow sucked out, and among them, human bones glowing in that dreadful whiteness. The thing carrying the drone gently placed the machine atop the pile of bones, almost as if performing a religious ritual. The camera now lay on its side, its angle pointed toward the depths of the cave, toward that queen, or source, whatever it was. Elias knew the drone was beyond salvaging. He had to back up the footage, start the van, and get out of there. But a detail on the screen made him unable to look away. Things were hanging from the cave ceiling. Cocoons, human-sized, semi-transparent, membrane-like cocoons. They were suspended from the ceiling by sticky secretions. Inside them were dark shapes, curled up in fetal positions. And one of them, the one directly in front of the camera, was moving. The thing inside was straining against the membrane, trying to get out. It was clawing from within. Just then, the silence inside Elias' minibus was shattered by a piercing, shrill alarm. Sound, beep, beep, beep. This was the minibus's proximity sensor alarm. It was a simple but effective radar system Elias had set up for external threats, scanning the vehicle's 360 degrees with microwave waves. Elias jerked his head up from the main screens and looked at the in-vehicle control panel, the small screen to the right of the steering wheel. On the radar screen, a red dot was flashing on the green graphic, showing the rear of the minibus. Someone was right behind the vehicle. "No way," Elias said. His voice trembled. "The drone is 2 kilometers away. The cave is there. They must be there. This must be a deer. The cave is there. They must be there. This must be a deer." But the radar didn't lie. And deer didn't scratch at metal doors. The red dot moved. It slid from behind the vehicle to its side, toward the driver's door. Then a second dot appeared, a third, a fifth. Within seconds, the radar screen filled with a red circle surrounding the minibus. Not just around it, the sensors began detecting the weight on the roof too. Elias reached for the 9 pistol under his seat. He gripped the cold handle, released the safety. Outside was pitch black. Rain continued to hit the window. Nothing was visible. Elias held his breath and approached the window. Without pressing his face against the glass, he tried to see outside. With the corner of his eye, only darkness, and then a gentle, almost timid tapping sound came from outside, against the metal body of the minibus. Tap, as if someone were probing the metal with a long, hard fingernail, testing its strength. Tap, tap. The sound came right next to Elias' ear, just beyond the glass. Elias slowly backed away. He pointed the gun at the door. His heart was pounding so hard it felt like it would burst through his chest. Just then, a voice came from the monitor on the table, from the drone's camera, 2 kilometers away. In that cave, the creature carrying the drone was leaning toward the camera. It pressed its toothless, dark, vertical mouth against the lens, and Elias heard that sound simultaneously from both the monitor and just outside the minibus, in perfect synchronization. A chorus, a stereo whisper. We see. Elias' blood ran cold. The drone was not an observation tool. The drone was a signal flare. It had followed them to their lair, and in the process, had served up its own location to them. The data flow between the drone and the command center was like a lighthouse burning in the dark forest for them. Elias had invited them to dinner by sending that signal. The minibus door handle slowly descended before Elias' eyes, which widened in horror as far as the rusty mechanism would allow. The sharp, grating squeak of metal scraping against metal was so piercing and nerve-wracking that it drowned out the sound of the downpour outside. The door was locked. Elias knew this. He had checked the latch when the operation began, but it didn't take long for him to sense that whatever was outside could overcome much more than a simple lock mechanism. The door handle reached its limit. It strained. Thud. And then a blow came that shook the entire chassis of the vehicle. Thud. The minibus rocked like a cradle on its 4 wheels. Equipment on the ceiling rattled loose. Empty coffee cups rolled to the floor. Stay back, Elias shouted. His voice sounded like a weak, unfamiliar scream, even to his own ears. In response, tearing sounds began to emanate from the minibus's metal roof. Rip, rip, not from a single point. First over the driver's compartment, then right in the middle of the cargo area, then from the rear door. They were tearing at the roof like a metal can being opened with a can opener. Elias' eyes involuntarily drifted to the main monitor, still broadcasting the drone camera feed. There in that hellish cave, things were getting worse. The drone was recording, lying on its side on top of piles of bones. Right in the center of the frame, that huge, semi-transparent cocoon was tearing open. The amber-colored liquid seeping from inside was pouring over the bones, melting the floor as it vaporized. The membrane of the cocoon was split lengthwise by a claw strike from within, and the thing inside came out. This was the missing climber he was looking for, Marcus L. But he was no longer human. His yellow North Face jacket was still on him. But the inside of the jacket had changed in a way that insulted human anatomy. The arms, those arms extended to his knees. The fingers had turned into bone protrusions, each as sharp as a scalpel. His legs were broken and twisted, his joints swollen, but the real horror was in his face. The climber's face had melted. The skin hung over his skull like wet parchment. His eyes were gone. Where his nose should have been, there were only 2 holes, and his mouth, jawless, a vertical, slit. The creature, as soon as it emerged from the cocoon, turned its head with a mechanical movement toward the drone lying on the ground. Those blind, hollow eye sockets locked onto the lens, and it opened its vertical mouth. Elias heard the sound coming from the monitor. A high-pitched scream, shrill enough to burst eardrums. In the same second, the 8 entities outside the minibus, on its roof and door, let out the same scream. The sound, with a stereo effect, came from both the monitor and outside, piercing Elias' brain. The windows rattled, dental fillings ached. This was not a chorus. It was an echo. They were all connected, a hive mind, one consciousness, multiple bodies, whatever the queen or transmitter in the cave did. The drones outside did the same. I have to cut the signal, Elias said, frantically attacking the keyboard. If I sever the connection, they'll go blind. They find me with this signal. He clicked the disconnect/emergency stop button to halt the data flow. An error message appeared on the screen. System error. External software interference. Authorization DENIED. What? Elias froze. External software. There's no internet. The drone's operating system had been hacked. But it wasn't done by a human hacker. Code began streaming across the screen. Not zeros and ones. Strange, fractal, geometric symbols. The same bioluminescent patterns on the cave wall were now flowing like a virus through Elias' Linux-based software. Code. This thing wasn't technological, but it could infect electricity, data, signals, a biological malware. Clang. The minibus roof, right above Elias' head, caved in with a loud crash. The metal roof bent like a tin can. Paint spilled out. Insulation foam rained down onto the table like snow. A long, gray, wet finger entered through the small, torn crack in the roof. It had no fingernail. It was a sharp, bony needle. Without thinking, Elias raised his gun and fired at the ceiling, at that finger. Bam, bam, bam. The gunshot echoed deafeningly in the enclosed space. The flame from the muzzle lit up the dark cabin for a moment. Like a strobe light, the bullets pierced the metal. They pierced flesh. From above, beyond the metal, came a sharp, high-pitched scream of pain. And from that hole, not blood dripped inside. A black, thick, acidic liquid dripped. The liquid fell onto Elias' keyboard. Aesthesize. The plastic keys began to melt. Smoke rose. An acidic smell burned his throat. Elias tried to escape backward toward the driver's seat. He could start the car and step on the gas. That was his only chance of escape. He turned the key. The engine growled, but didn't start. The electronics were dead. The dashboard was dark. The minibus was no longer a shelter, but a metal coffin. The vehicle's windshield shattered from a massive blow from outside. Shards of glass, shattered into pieces, rained down inside onto Elias, onto his face. Rain and wind poured in like a violent slap, and through that broken glass, two long, gray arms reached inside. Elias turned his gun in that direction, but the magazine was empty. The trigger pulled back empty. Click, click. In the last glimmer of light from the headlights, he saw the figure trying to get inside on the hood. It was the forest ranger who had disappeared in the same area last year. The remains of his green uniform, his badge still on his shirt. But his face, it had melted, just like the climber in the cave. His skull had elongated. His jaw hung down to his chest. And he was talking, not in his own voice. He spoke in sync with the static hiss coming from the drone, the sound coming from the speaker. Found, accept, it. Elias, as a last resort, threw the empty gun in his hand at the creature's melted face and reached for the red flare gun on the passenger seat. "Don't come closer," he shouted. "I'll burn you all." He fired the flare. FSSSSD. The red phosphorus exploded on the vehicle's windshield, right on the creature's chest. The creature screamed shrilly and was thrown backward. The red light stained the forest's darkness and the raindrops with blood for a moment, and in that light, Elias saw around the minibus. It wasn't just that ranger. There were dozens of them, perched in the treetops, on branches, crawling under the minibus. Each one was a person who had gone missing in this forest in the past, whose case had been closed with the search efforts were unsuccessful. Campers, hunters, fugitives, children. Now they had all returned, changed, transformed, joined the hive, and hungry. Elias looked at the monitor on the table one last time in the fading light of the flare. The drone was still broadcasting. The thing that had emerged from that cocoon in the cave, the climber, had picked up the drone from the ground. He was holding the camera to his own face, like taking a selfie, and he was showing the thousands of cocoons behind him. They were all cracking open. They were all opening. This was not a hunting party. This was an invasion. When Elias was caught by those countless hands hanging down from the minibus's shattered roof, when he felt those bone needles piercing his shoulders, the last thing he felt was pain. What he felt was that foreign, cold, electrical data stream seeping into his mind. His consciousness wasn't being erased. It was being uploaded. He was being incorporated into the system. Connection established, Elias thought, but the thought wasn't his. 48 hours after the incident, Agency, National Security Agency, NSA, Anomaly Cleanup Team. Subject, Sector 44, Cleanup Operation and Data Destruction. On the morning of November 16, a modified minibus belonging to Elias Thorne was found on an old lumber road near the Sector 44 border. The vehicle was crushed as if it had been put through a giant hydraulic press. The metal frame was bent inward, not outward, turning it into a metal ball. No biological remains of Elias Thorne were found inside. No biological remains of Elias Thorne were found inside. However, all the electronic equipment inside the vehicle, monitors, radios, GPS devices, all of it had melted and fused together. Within this pile of molten metal, an amber-colored, resin-like, unidentifiable substance was detected that could not be cut even in a laboratory environment. Technicians at the site managed to recover only a single video file from the melted server. The file was the last 15 seconds of encrypted data stream from Elias' drone. The image starts black. No sound. Only corrupted technical data streams across the screen. But at the 12th second, the image appears for a moment. The camera is looking down from very high above, over the clouds. Below, the Sector 44 forest is visible. But the forest is moving. Thousands of trees, uprooted from their roots, are shifting position, walking north toward the nearest settlement, the city of Seattle. They flow like a green, undulating, living ocean. And right in front of the camera, a face appears, blocking the lens. Elias Thorne's face. But he has no eyes. In place of his eyes are two small, red, glowing drone camera lenses. They are fused with his skin, embedded in his flesh, lenses where metal and flesh meet. The lenses focus, their apertures opening and closing. He smiles mechanically, tremulously, and it is not Elias' voice, but a chorus, both digital and organic, composed of the voices of thousands of different people. That speaks. Signal strong. We are spreading. NSA action plan. Area 44 must be quarantined immediately. The story forest fire out of control must be fed to the media. A napalm attack must be launched on the area, and it must be burned until the ground is glassed. Underground tunnels must be sealed with concrete. Elias Thorne and the missing climber case must be recorded as a bear attack, and the files must be sealed. This video file should be encrypted and moved to a level 5 secure archive. It should never be viewed. Warning 2, CITIZNS. If you are currently walking in the forest, in nature, or on the outskirts of the city, and you notice that your phone's signal has suddenly been cut off, and you notice a drone silently buzzing overhead, watching you, do not wave. Do not ask for help. Do not wonder. Just run, because the hands holding that controller are no longer human hands.